All right, come on in, fill in, all the way on the walls if you need to. All right, this session we got Joe Partlow. He's been involved with InfoSec in some capacity or role for over 15 years, mostly on the defensive side, but always fascinated by offense. In this talk today, we'll go over some helpful methods and items used to quickly acquire digital evidence and share some open source automation scripts we use on a regular basis to assist in the acquisition process.
All right, thanks, guys. There's a couple of seats over here if some of you guys want to fill in. All right, so yeah, this is this talk is really just some areas that we found just in our kind of day-to-day that I really found lacking. Not that there's not a ton of good information out there, but really what we've found is that it's research has kind of stopped and then started and then stopped, or people have kind of began an idea but really didn't end. So this is kind of hopefully some ideas to continue that research on. So, who am I? Like I said, I've been in security for a while, mostly on the defense side. There's a whole bunch of letters and stuff I have, but I won't bore you with that. But really, I'm just interested in forensics. So really, that's what it comes down to is, how can we make this stuff easier, better? I realize sometimes it's a little bit of a dry subject, but there's a lot of cool stuff going on. And at the end of the day, the offense stuff is probably more sexy, but really this is, the last talk he brought up a good point that day to day really, this is what happens. So we don't all get to do pen tests every day, but this usually happens every day. So what is live acquisition? So as Bad News Brian, he says, it's really the process of pulling the forensic artifacts from a running machine. And the old school thought was, first pull the plug out. That's the first thing you're supposed to do, and do your disk image. That's been dead for a few years now. And if you do that, you're going to miss a lot of good information. That being the sole method has been gone for a while, but I'm just surprised how often we still run into that mindset. Not to say that disk forensics is dead or we shouldn't do it, but we should definitely, there's going to be times where we want to get the live information first. There's a lot of good stuff going on there. Let's get that first. Then if we have time or if we were able to, let's image the drive. So you don't want to waste your time imaging and miss a lot of stuff. All right. So why is it important? What type of stuff can we get from that? So active network connections, that's probably one of the biggest ones. If this thing is actively communicating out on a botnet or there's an attacker that's on the machine, you want to make sure that you're able to see that. And if you yank that plug out and do your disk image, you're going to miss it. So let's try to get that first. Memory resident stuff, that's huge. I would argue that probably the memory resident stuff or the memory forensics is probably the most important area of forensics right now. So much of that stuff just sits in memory. A lot of it doesn't even write to disk. So making sure that you get that first is absolutely key. Same thing with currently logged on users. So if there is a malicious user or unauthorized user on that machine, you want to make sure that you can see that before you just yank the plug, shut it down. They may not come back up. And then same with running services. If there is something that's running in the background, it may not be a Windows service that's installed, but some sort of running process. You want to make sure that you get that, again, before you shut it down. So, when won't traditional disk images work? If it's something that you go in, you try to acquire the machine, you shut it down. First thing you do is you want to try to image it and pull it up in a VM. There's some attacks and malware that are VM aware, so that may not work well because the malware may not start up. It may recognize that it's in a VM. There's some great tools to try to do that. Cuckoo being one of them. But to try to bring that in, that try to hide the fact that they're in a VM instance. But that's a big one. Some of the advanced stuff, it's not going to show up or not fire back up. Location aware. So if me as a malware writer, I may know that your headquarters is in a certain locale. I code my piece of my binary specifically for that. If I see, okay, now I'm coming from a different IP block, or I'm coming from a different type of machine or different geographic location, maybe it won't pop up from there. So kind of another advanced thing, but something we want to be aware of. You may not have time to image the whole drive. Obviously there's storage is cheap now, and we regularly run into images that are a terabyte or more. So if it's a couple things I have on there, if it's smash and grab where you've got to go in, you've got to just acquire what you can, and then you got to get out. Or if you're on the offensive side and you're doing kind of a black bag job, some of our 3-letter agency friends, they may do some of this stuff. It's quick, it's in, it doesn't have time, hours to do, time to sit there and wait for the image to fire up. So you want to try to get as much as you can, as quick as you can. Memory is going to be the key thing for that. That's if you only can grab one thing, at least you can take that back. Usually it will dump pretty fast and analyze that, where if you don't have time to do disk for that. But that's kind of the whole point of this talk, is what other types of things can we do very, very fast to pull that information off, so that if we have a limited amount of time or resources, we have the most information possible for when we take it back to our forensic station. So just kind of recapping, what are the different types of methods of acquisition that we can do? You've got your traditional disk or drive base. That's kind of where it all started, and that's goes back decades really, and that's doing a bit-for-bit copy of the hard drive. Anything that's on the hard drive, you're going to take an image of it, you're going to bring it back to your lab, you're going to mount it read-only, or if it's a VM image, maybe you're going to try to mount it that way and look at it. So it's valuable, but there's some other things. The memory, like I said, huge. Especially when stuff is running in memory, active connections, active processes, getting that dump so that you can bring it back and analyze it. Volatility, great tool. Got to give those guys a plug. That's something that is going to save you a lot of time, and you're going to find a lot of stuff in there versus just looking on the disk. Running system state. So what are the things that are happening? So services, processes, network connections, logged on users. We kind of talked about that already, but that's kind of a specific area. Maybe you just want to grab that information. Gives you some insight on what's that machine doing, what's it participating in, who's on it. And then you got the virtual machine, which I think this is kind of a cool new area where obviously I haven't been in one environment where they're not probably at least a third or more virtual at this point. So that's a cool thing I think coming up. Some more research that I know I'm interested in as well is grabbing that machine image, whether it's a snapshot or the actual image that's stored as a backup or something. What can we get off of that? Especially if it's paused, then you're going to get a lot of cool stuff where you've got kind of a frozen snapshot of that state. You might have memory still in there that's being used, services. Basically it's getting it all at that point. So I don't want to make it sound like I'm bashing on traditional forensics or disk forensics, but the same rules apply for live acquisitions. You still have to minimize touching the disk or memory. You don't want to trash the evidence, basically. Whether that's scripts that you're running on the machine, and that's kind of the old school thought, is that you're not supposed to run anything. You do want to run that on the lab, or like I said, there's times where you may need to do that. So minimize the amount of stuff that you're doing off of that. Have your stuff on a external disk. Try to minimize the amount of. Obviously, you don't want to install anything on the machine. That's the next one. So don't install any programs on the victim machine. Any standalone binaries that you would need, make sure that you have those ready to go. You can run them from removable storage if you need to. Preferably not stored on the disk that you're analyzing. Again, you want to make sure that that's as clean as possible. Another big one is ensure repeatable results or methods. There may be a time where you've got to go to court to defend yourself or defend your actions in a case. You want to make sure that, the same way that you would image a drive and do chain of custody and all that good stuff, you want to make sure that you do the same thing here. If there is a question, the first thing that you're going to get hit with is, well, you were on the machine, or you ran this script, or you did that. So You want to make sure that you're using sound forensic techniques. You're doing stuff by the book. You're still documenting everything that you need to do, and that you're using stuff that the defendant or the other party could reproduce if they had to on that image. Again, another one, document all actions in script. So anything you do, make sure you document that, because you're going to get called out on it. Make sure that it's kind of out in the open. You're not trying to hide anything. This is still something that you need to make sure that you're not hiding or being open about. Hash any files. So if there is an instance where you want to copy files off of there, maybe you can't pull a full drive image, but there is some certain files that you want to get, and we'll get into those later. Again, make sure you hash those so that there's never a question of, oh, is this really the file that was on that machine versus the one that defendant or prosecutor is looking at to match up. So you still want to do that, same as if you would hash kind of the drive image along the same lines. And then, obviously analyze and disk image. At the end of the day, you're still going to want to do that. If you've gathered all your live info that you can and you do have the time or resources to get a full disk image, continue on with that. It's still a valuable thing that you need to do. Still a lot of good info on there. A lot of the advanced stuff, though, really doesn't touch a disk anymore. So you got to make sure that you do both. All right. So when does it go wrong? I'll relay a story, and this is not meant to make any kind of organization look bad, but a few years ago, at a previous life, I was an IT director for a software company down in South Florida, and come back from lunch one time, and there's full, SWAT police in our lobby of our office. So it was a pretty wild crew. So it wasn't a shock why that they were there. It was more, why are they there? So we've had, unbeknownst to us, there was a person in our call center that was on probation for, let's just say he had an underage girlfriend and took some inappropriate pictures. So he was on probation for that. And part of that condition was that there was surprise visits by the Broward County Sheriff's Department and others that would come to his place of work or his house to make sure that, and they would do periodic image grabs and make sure he didn't have these images still on his computer or his work computer. Well, me being interested in forensics, I was like, great, these guys got all the cool tools. They've got FBI tools with them. I want to hang out and see what these guys are doing. So go over there, and it was a machine out in the call center. So you can imagine there's 100 people or so out there. They go out to grab the machine, and of course that's you've got armed guys in there with 3 forensic guys. It's going to cause some disruption in the office. So I'm watching them do it, go through, and they put the disk in and start running commands or trying to run commands. And I'm thinking to myself, that's probably not the best forensic practice to do something like that. And then I realized it's a live CD, and I kind of pulled one of the investigators aside and said, look, that seems to be a live Linux CD. This is a Windows box. You're trying to run live Linux commands off of that. It's not going to work. So after multiple times of putting the CD in, trying to run commands, rebooting the machine but missing the CD boot instance, now this thing has been bounced 3 or 4 times, and I'm just thinking whatever evidence you were going to get is probably going to get thrown out regardless at this point. So eventually they got the CD up and running, got into the little Linux boot menu, tried to, basically they had a pre-canned script that would go out, search the image or search the hard drive for any images that it found, suck all the images down to a USB stick. Well, couldn't figure out how to mount the USB stick in Linux. So, they're the second fail at that point. So they're trying to mount this thing, couldn't get it working. And at one point I said, look, you guys, you've already bounced the machine, so it's not a worry about downing it. How about we take the machine, I'll put it in the back room. You can work a little bit better. It's not chaos out here with the call center. They didn't want to do that. And then, what it came down to is about a half an hour of them trying this thing. They ended up walking out with nothing. They couldn't get any of the tools to work. No script would write to the USB because they couldn't get that. And most of the way through, I look over and the kid that's his workstation's being analyzed. He's over here texting like crazy. So I'm thinking, all right, they were going to his house afterwards, so he's probably telling his roommate to, trash all the computers or hide them or whatever. So, nobody was watching this kid, even though there's probably 5 of them there, all focused around trying to get the machine. So, why is that a fail? The 3 big things I took out of that is, learn the tools that you're doing. Don't let that be the first time that you're trying to run scripts or, use your acquisition tool. Doesn't matter if you're doing a disk image or anything. Practice first. You don't want to struggle with that and end up trashing the evidence. And then watch your surroundings. If, like I said, the guy was sitting back there texting everything, so I wouldn't be surprised if they, when they took him home, they didn't find anything at his house either. So, kind of a lesson. Again, not to bash these guys, but it's just a common theme that we see is that people don't practice this stuff. So what type of stuff should we get when we do the live acquisition? Obviously there's a ton of different things going on. Obviously it depends on the OS, what we want to do. This is kind of specific to Windows, but obviously you have Linux machines and various other OSs. So the big thing is the memory dump. Try to get that first, just so that you're not, remember anything that you do, any commands that you do, anything like that is going to alter that memory a little bit. So try to get that dump first out of the way. There's tools that will dump that very, very fast. Dump it is one that comes to mind. I did 4 gig of memory in a couple minutes. It's pretty quick. And then the disk dump. If you have the time and the resources to try to get that first too, so that if you are going to run scripts or mount USBs on that live system, that at least you've got kind of those 2 static things out of the way. Again, you may not have time to do that. System config. You want to make sure, what are the network settings? What are the open shares? What drives are attached to this thing? What local users? Any installed applications? When's the last time this thing was patched? So try to get all that information as well. It'll help you go back when you take this information back to your lab to really try to get a timeline together, figure out, all right, well, we found this and realize it hasn't been patched since this date, so it's probably this vulnerability. So, again, the goal of this is to not do the analysis right then and there. It's get everything we can as fast as we can, as thorough as we can, do the analysis later. Network connections, again, another huge one. Some of the stuff that's obviously connecting back, if it's a botnet, is foaming home. You want to make sure get a good list of those, what it's listening on. The startup info. Obviously this is kind of an old school way of, attacking the machine or getting a foothold is, when it first boots up or if Windows first starts running, you're going to run a set of scripts or service or something like that. So, old school, but it still is something that you want to grab, whether that's reg keys, startup programs, whatever it is, get all that stuff. The running processes and services. Obviously, you want to grab that, not just the stuff that's official Windows service, but stuff that's just running as a process, stuff that's been spawned off from another process. Get all that things. The schedule tasks, obviously another good one. Maybe something set to kick off at a certain time in the middle of the night and then shut down. If you're doing your acquisition pool at noon, maybe you don't see that when it's running right now. So look at schedule tasks, see if there's something that might kick off later. The cookies and browser cache. This is one that we see a lot where the infected files are in the cache. So if you can get through those, look through them, look at the timeline, sometimes that will help. Analyzing those, a lot of times there's downloaded internet files that might be the initial method of infection. Look at those. A lot of times we see them in the cache. Obviously, any USB devices that were used. If somebody did plug in something to exfiltrate data or copy tools from, anything like that, grab a list of those things so that you can then go back and match and say, hey, was this an authorized serial number or an authorized device? If not, all right, we may need to have the employee come back and we grab the information off that as well. Event logs. Obviously, it's one of the most important things. Nobody likes dealing with event logs. They're hard to go through. There's a ton of them. It's hard to manage them. But at the end of the day, that's hopefully where everything's go. Now, obviously, not everything is going to log to event logs, but it helps piece together a timeline. And especially if you see some gaps, that would be a good one. So obviously, stuff like clearing of events, time changes on the system, login failures, any privileged use, application crashes. Any of that may be hints to when and how that machine was compromised, so that you can piece together your timeline. Any one of these things is probably not going to be a silver bullet for you. You're going to want to look at all these things, put them all together, see how they fit. Some of them may be totally unrelated, but some of them may have hints that can help you with other parts of the investigation. So what are some advanced stuff that we should get? What drivers are actually loaded? What were the last 50 DLLs that were created? If something is spawning off other processes, this is extremely helpful to say, all right, well, what actually was loaded up? What are we doing on here? We talked briefly about kind of the downloaded executable files. Another huge one, because most of the time, most infections are going to come from, some sort of browser type infection. Somebody browsed a site they shouldn't have, clicked on a link they shouldn't have in the email, downloaded files. So anything from the browser, that's going to be a good one. The DNS cache. I've heard a couple talks today where people are talking more about DNS. This is an area that's, for the most part, it's been neglected. The guys that are and people that have been in forensics for a while know that this is kind of a gold mine, if you will. But I see still this, we do a lot of SIM work as well, and that's one of the huge areas that is usually missing from most people as far as bringing in logs, analyzing, is the DNS cache. It's not easy, and there's a lot of data, so that makes it hard to do. But that's really going to be your initial indication of, is this thing connecting to something that it shouldn't? Or is it trying to? A lot of times what we'll see is the whole employee laptop or something that comes onto the network. Maybe they're kids or whoever were using it at home for something questionable, bring it on the network, now it's trying to phone home from the network. So you want to see if that's happening. Shell bags. So this is kind of a, I won't say it's unknown, but it's not as well known as some of the other things. It's again not a silver bullet to see what's going on, but there's a set of registry values for how the GUI has been used, window position, things like that. So if you ever get a case of, was this employee looking at things they shouldn't have, unauthorized files, this makes it a little bit easier to prove that yes, they were browsing that directory, or they were opening this viewer to look at these things. Reg keys. There's a ton of them out there. Shell commands, obviously a good one. Any browser helper, objects, things like that. So, obviously there's a ton of those. And we have a good list, and I'll kind of show you guys here in a second some registry keys that we look at on a normal basis. But that's that's one of those things that it's real time suck to go through the registry, and they're hidden anywhere. So we'll get into some methods that we can kind of help with that later. Interesting files. So, as part of this, what we want to get is looking at prefetch files, compressed files, encrypted files, alternate data streams, files with no extension. So a lot of times when you look at malware that we find on PCs, it's something with no extension, some hidden files, things like that. So any of those files are going to be helpful to copy off. Again, if you have the disk image, great. If you do not, try to at least pull those types of things. Prefetch are going to help you because it's going to show you, what was ran, what was loaded, and then same with the other ones. Obviously, ADS, another old school attack, but still a pretty slick way to hide things. So pull those files as well. And then live packet capture. This is kind of I won't say it's controversial, but it's definitely been helpful for things that if we were able to get this on some investigations that we've had. Again, kind of goes back to that's it's frowned upon to touch the machine and do anything on the machine, but sometimes we don't care. We want to just really see what's going on with the machine. We have no concern about taking this thing to court. We're not going to image the drive. We just want to know who's it communicating, shut it off, whether we're going to create a IDS rule, firewall rule, or something. All we do, all the customer wants to do is just shut the traffic down. They really don't. They're going to blow away the machine anyway, re-image it. So live packet capture might be pretty cool to catch. To see just what's happening. Is it somebody doing something slick tunneling under through DNS? Are they using some sort of random port that they shouldn't be? You'll see all that there where it may not be as obvious if you're just looking at open network connections. Okay. So, on the box, again, this is a situation where if we are, maybe directed to say, hey, we know we're going to blow away the machine. This is not going to go to court. All we want to do is find out what the piece of malware was that got on the machine so that we can, either add that to our scanner or create an IOC for it or something like that. Here's where you can do some targeted searches. So, something that would be helpful would be, obviously files created in the last X days or a particular date. So if you have a machine that's been compromised, the date roughly that it happened, let's just put all the files that were created. Yeah, you're going to get some stuff that probably, is legit, but, more times than not, if they haven't done any time manipulation, which is a caveat you got to worry about, a lot of times we see that they don't. Attackers are sloppy as well. Advanced attacks, yeah, they're going to trash the timestamps and it's going to be hard to find. But a lot of times we get lucky and they don't care. They just, it's scripted, it's automated. They're not worrying about that. They're just dropping files. And same with files are owned by a particular user or modified in the last amount of days. So, if a person has visited a questionable site, downloaded some files, let's just pull everything that was owned. Especially if this was a shared machine or a machine in a call center or something like that, where you've got a lot of people that are using the same machine, you may want to know, hey, we found this piece of malware on it. Who was the user kind of logged in when this happened? All right, now let's kind of go pull the rest of their stuff as well. Gives us a little bit of an indication on what we should look at. When you've got a terabyte drive full of files, where do you start? So those are a couple things that we usually start with. IOCs. So, this is kind of one of those things that it's been around for a few years. There's been a few good talks on IOCs. I encourage you guys to kind of do some research into this. And this is kind of an attempt really for, forensic investigators to say, hey, we found this piece of malware. How can we help see where else this might be? So, again, these things will live in memory. It can be found on the disk. So think about this as kind of a known set of artifacts that you might be looking for. It could be a reg key, could be, like I said, a file somewhere, could be an IP address. So there's a lot of different artifacts, and I'll kind of go through some of them here in a minute. But search for that. Do an IOC scan, and there's a few tools out there. Mandiant's got Redline, which is kind of a free one that they put out there that helps. But there's some ways that you can do this kind of on your own as well. So again, really just IOCs, just to kind of give a recap. Like I said, I see this gaining more traction. It's a pretty cool idea. A lot of people are contributing to this. IOC Bucket's a great site. So if you want to get some of these, they're I should have put the link in there. Sorry. But it's a site where people contribute to that, and there's a few hundred of them up there now. Again, pull those down, do your scans against it. Very interesting to see what these things are going after. Again, typical IOCs, virus signatures, IP addresses, could be file hashes, could be URLs or IPs that are, that there might be something connecting to. And some of the examples that I have there are, there's a few flavors. Kind of open IOCs, probably, I guess, one of the biggest ones. But Yara, Cybox, Styx. It all comes down to the same thing. Hey, what's a common framework that us as forensic investigators or malware reversers or how can we kind of share that information for what we find so that it can help others that we're looking for. All right, so what does that look like? Let me get a sample here, and I've severely snipped this here so it doesn't take up the whole thing. And I apologize here. Let me see if I can make this font bigger. Oops. All right. Text Wrangler is not playing nice on the expansion, but hopefully you guys can see that. But what it is it's really just it's an XML file at the end of the day. There's a description about it. In this case, it's the Timbolt APT backdoor. Standard description of that, who the author was, when it came out. And if you look down in definitions, that's your indicators. So you can nest these things. It could be this file and this registry key, or it could be, hey, we've seen this file or this file and this IP address. So you can mix and match these things. Like I said, I've severely snipped this down. Some of them are this size. Some of them are much, much longer. Depends on the actual malware that it's using. So you can see stuff like here. So this would be a MD5 hash. So if you've got FireEye or something like that that has a list of these that you may be getting fed in, or you've done your own analysis, you can scan for this and look for that. It could be a file name somewhere. So Java SVC exe, you could search for that and say, hey, if I see this somewhere, I know that's a pretty good indication that I've maybe have this backdoor on there. DNS. So this thing looks like it phones home to this IP address and this DNS. So let's look at our active network connections. Or if we pull our memory dump, we see stuff that's going out to those things. Again, comes back to let's make sure that you're getting those DNS logs so you can bounce it against them. Or reg keys. So, in this case, this is the classic run key. Maybe that's hiding something in there. So, like I said, very, very small sample. I tried to snip out, the redundant ones, but just to give you an idea of what the IOC is, what type of stuff that you can look for on that acquired either memory dump or disk image, or if you're going to scan it real time. Okay. So obviously that's a lot, and really kind of when I sat back and said, man, how do we, there's tons of things that we want to get. How can we automate this? How can we, have the one ring to rule them all or whatever? Kind of what came to my mind first was, let's do it in PowerShell. It's cheap, it's installed on every machine, and the equivalent would be Bash on Linux boxes. There are some caveats which I'll get into here in a second, but when there's some great tools out there that will do live acquisition, Encase, Resolution 1. I mean, there's a whole list of very expensive, very good tools that will do this. In my experience, though, either the budget doesn't allow for something that's expensive, or even if you have that, I can tell you almost without fail that it is not deployed out on the entire enterprise. Maybe they've got it on key servers. Maybe it's not fully deployed yet, but there's always some time where, all right, let's acquire it. We have Encase Enterprise. Great. Sorry, it's not on that machine. Now you don't want to go install it then. It's kind of too late if you got to put this agent on there after the fact. So, try to think of what's a quick way to do this. And there are some other PowerShell scripts out there. It's like I said, there is some caveats though. So, attempting this automation, the first question I always get is, why not do it in Python or Ruby or whatever the programming language is? You don't want to install programs, and that includes compiler. Sure, you can do a standalone, Python executable, but if you have to modify that on the fly, it makes that very hard to do. If you've got it honed down where you've got a specific instance and you can do that, that may be an option. But it's, PowerShell is good integration to kind of all the Windows functions. I haven't, there's most of the stuff that you can do in one, you can do in the other. So it's really not a, hardcore preference, but it's, PowerShell's there. It's easy. Now, where you run into this is if you have old machines that do not have it, pre-XP or even XP, some of the later versions, it was an option. So, that would be one caveat is if you're dealing with old, or you have those old machines in your environment, you may want to go a different route. Like I said, there's a lot of good outdated scripts out there to do this. There's a bunch of projects that I saw in researching kind of this talk. Smarter guys than me, better PowerShell coders than me for sure that have done this, but the problem is it seems to a lot of times stop. It was a project someone was interested in, halted development on it, or a lot of times they maybe pulled it in-house. They went to work for somewhere that they said, hey, we really don't want to disclose anymore. Here's kind of the starter, but we're not going to put any of the good stuff in or continue updating it. There's really no kind of common framework to do this, at least in the open source kind of standpoint. A lot of this is, the offensive guys have done a good job with this, with SET or Metasploit is kind of having a prepackaged framework, if you will, to do a particular set of functions. From the forensic side, there's some distros that will do that for sure, but to have something to do the live acquisition, I found there wasn't a lot out there. A lot of scattered scripts here or there, but nothing kind of pulling it all together and continuously updated. So one of the big to-dos that I came across when I started doing this is the analysis script. So now that you've got all this stuff, now what? Again, it's usually a variety of 20 different tools that you may run for specific conditions. So that's something that I thought would be cool too, is let's automate that as well. Most of the time you're going to run the same common set of switches, same search strings, things like that. All that can be scripted. You don't have to type that in every time. And the goal, like I said, is to automate this task. You're never going to actually replace the actual forensic analysis work. The goal of this is to let's automate what we can. Let's streamline it as much as we can, and the rest, maybe we got to manually pull it. Maybe there's some other things we have to do. Especially like values or gathered files, keys, stuff like that. That stuff we could script out, especially if we're coupling that with IOCs. We know where it is. We know what we're looking for. You don't have to type that out. Again, you may not have the time. If it's a certain case where you've got to go in, do your acquisition, and leave, maybe it's a hostile situation. Maybe it's something where time is of the essence. You want to have that. You don't want to be typing those things out. And then the option to copy the files off as well. Maybe you want to list it. Maybe you do want to pull those files off to some sort of removable storage or something for later analysis. So. That's something that I'm kind of going through on, and I'll show you the script here in a minute, where really just having the option to do one or both or some combination thereof. The thing we talked about earlier as far as documentation, making sure that everything is repeatable. If you have to go to court for this, show exactly the steps you did. The start transcript commandlet is great for that because it will do that for you. So, even if you're scripting this stuff on your own, sure, you can kind of write out to your file the time and start time, end time of all the commandlets that you're running. But the start transcript does that for you. So cool little commandlet that will save you some time. And then a Linux version, the majority of the acquisitions that we do are Windows, but we certainly run across some Linux stuff. So I think it'd be cool to do that too. Can do that with a bash scripting as well. A little more, as far as the caveats go, you probably want to use trusted binaries more so on the Linux version. You don't want to trust your shell necessarily on a compromised machine, but it's easier to do that on a Linux box if you need to replace it. Okay, so what are some of the big caveats? Obviously, anytime we're messing with a live system, there's some things you got to worry about. Anytime we're depending on native Windows programs or native Linux programs, things like that, there's some things you got to worry about. So API calls, could be inaccurate if the box was rooted. So if there is a rootkit on it, it's going to return back what the rootkit says. So you got to be aware of that. A lot of times that's always a concern in the back of our minds, but most of the times for the stuff that we're doing on a regular basis, it's just not rooted. It's malware that's on there. A lot of times we don't have to worry about it. The customer isn't concerned about it. There's a pretty good indication it's not a rootkit, but still a caveat to worry about. So if you think it might be possible, or you think you just want to be safe about it, check it. Run Gmer, rootkit remover, Sophos, Malwarebytes. I mean, there's a ton of them out there. You could run that on there too if you need to. You can also pull from raw memory or raw disk versus the Win API. The caveat with this, PowerShell will do this, and there's some scripts out there that do that. The problem is, if you have to prove that method in a court of law, sometimes a script that you wrote is going to be scrutinized a lot more than, something like volatility or some of the other various tools, dump it or whatever, that have been used on numerous court cases. So you've got kind of, proven methods versus something that you coded. You're just going to be, not that it's wrong, but you're going to be, held up a lot to more scrutiny. Make sure you output this stuff. So if you are copying the files off or you are copying a list of things that you found, output it to remote file share or USB, netcat it off to some other location. You don't want to put that stuff on the drive that you're trying to analyze. It's just going to mess things up and obviously be called into question on your sound forensic practices if you're doing something like that. So make sure you do that. Back to the story earlier, make sure that you tested that and it works depending on what OS you're working with. There's like I said, the helper programs, there's some that you're probably going to want to depend on versus doing it raw. It's just include that. I call them out in the shell, and I'll kind of show you real quick for that. And then we talked about the Linux version. Make sure you use trusted binaries for that. All right, so let me, I'll kind of show you real quick what this looks like. And, I'll put this up, and I apologize for the small font, and this thing's over 500 lines, so I won't read every line to you, but I kind of want to just walk through the method to my madness. And, by all means, it's not up on GitHub yet, but I want to polish it up of this, and I'll put it up there. But anyone that would like a copy of this, either to play, scrutinize, like I said, I'm no superstar PowerShell programmer, but if they are, I'm always looking to help. So just to walk through this real quick, what it does is, there's a menu that will do a bunch of different things. So, obviously you can run a memory dump, you can do the live snapshot items, you can do the startup items, browser items, registry keys, file items. Those are the things like ADS, encrypted files, things like that. Event logs, kind of auto snag. I stole this idea from the old Autopwn, DB Autopwn from Metasploit. Let's just launch it all, do it all at once. IOC search. So if you've got IOCs that you can load in, you can feed this in and it will scan it. And then get all files from xdate or xuser. That includes this hive here if you want to do shellbag analysis, things like that. Or if you want to dump network traffic. So again, you don't want to install WinPCAP on this to do this. So there's a Windows version of TCP dump that does not require that. And you can do that way. If you wanted to say, hey, let me run this thing for an hour and see what it's communicating with. Or maybe I run it for a day, and if it's phoning home at 3 in the morning every day, I'll be able to catch that. Or dump the entire disk. You could always do your traditional disk image off of that. So each one of those was kind of broken into functions. So the goal is that you can kind of, like I said, it's kind of like a framework where you can say, hey, I only want to grab the memory dump, or I only want to grab this set of info. It just calls that individual function, or you can do it all. The memory dump, obviously you can just call dump it, and it'll pop up and walk you through that. Pulling the system configuration data, so things like user accounts, current logon information, network configuration, any open shares, map drives. Really go through and kind of pull all these things. IP addresses that are on the NIC could be helpful. Environmental variables, that's always a good one to get. If you want to copy the host file, that's helpful. We had a case recently where the malware, for whatever reason, was trying to overwrite a host file, but it didn't realize it was smart enough it already did it. So there was, a million lines in there of the same thing every time it tried to go out and write to the host file. Startup info, this is really just startup applications, running processes. Browser information, so DNS cache, DNS failed resolutions, temporary internet files for like the last 5 days. You can tweak that to whatever you want. Cookies, pull it this way. Any typed URLs. That way you could say, hey, you did go to, I know nobody knows what RedTube is in here, but if you guys saw recently that they had a compromise where the site was infected, anyone that went to it pretty much, was probably compromised. So, oh, I didn't type that URL into my browser. Well, yeah. Registry keys. Like I said, there's a whole bunch of good ones out here. These are just some ones that, off the top of my head we put in there. I won't walk through all those. IE extensions, a lot of them in there. File system info, shadow copy stuff, encrypted files, compressed files. Interesting files, you could say, hey, pull out everything with an extension of, I don't know, VBS or 7Z or whatever you want. You could just give it a list of file extensions and it will rip through that pretty quick. Files with data streams. Again, classic, oldie but a goodie, but let's go through and pull all those files, grab all the streams out of it where it's not the data stream, which is the typical, that's your real data. Everything else is going to be stuff that's been added. Files with no extension, that's a good one that you see a lot with malware. And then event logs, there's a million of them in there that you could do for process execution, application crashes. IOC search, like I said, you could, if you fed this a list of file locations, just rip through the disk real quick and find them, see if they're there. If they are, you get a quick hit. Hey, it's a good probability that it's infected by this. And then, like I said, starting an ND data files, that just grabs them all there. Same with user-owned, grabbing those there. The net dump, you could run the Windows version of TCP dump, grab that stuff, maybe you run it for an hour, day, whatever, might be helpful. Your DCF, LDD, classic, just disk image. So, yeah, 506. You don't want to type that every time you go out and do acquisition. Maybe you don't want to do all of it, but every one of those things might be helpful if you're working on a case. So let me jump back over to here. So what's next? I mean, obviously we got all this stuff. What do we do with it now? So obviously you're going to bring that back and work on it on your forensic workstation. Like I said, if you only had a half an hour to pull everything you could off the machine, what's the most that you can get? All right, let's go back and analyze it later. So again, volatility, huge, awesome tool for that. Check out the plugins page. There's a lot of cool stuff out there. And chances are, if you're looking for something, somebody's probably already done it. If you need something, there's somebody probably already did it. Search it through the registry hives. Like I said, SBAG is a tool that you could use that will automate that. So when you pull this back in the forensic station, obviously you can have a lot more flexibility with third-party tools, things like that, to where you don't have to worry about running these on the machine. It's on your forensic station, so you can get a lot more creative with that. Network connections. So if you've got a list of, bad IPs that you pulled either through IOCs or active network connections, bounce it against those OSINT feeds. Malwaredomains.com is a great one. I think there's like 40,000 IPs in that thing. There's probably a good 30 or 40 out there that are updated on a regular basis. Bounce it against that. It's a pretty good indication if you see that something's phoning home that it shouldn't. The SQLite databases. This is kind of one of my favorite ones. So, iTunes backups, things like that. A lot of good stuff in there. If you've got a victim machine or something that, or a machine that you believe has been compromised or don't know if it has, see if they've hooked their phone up to it. Maybe it was a stolen laptop or something like that, and somebody tried to sync their iPhone to it. If they did, you can grab the SQLite database, look at all the lists of their calls, anything that we would have backed up in there. That's a good one to grab. And then, you obviously run the classic strings against any binaries that you've pulled down. Again, like I said, this is not meant to replace by any means kind of traditional forensics. Let's add to our arsenal. And, that's something that, people have been doing for years, is running strings against binaries, things like that, ADS files. All right. So I know that was a fire hose of info. Any questions? I left some time where we could kind of go through. Like I said, open to definitely suggestions, things that you guys have used that would be helpful. Yeah, first one.
Yeah, I have one question, one comment. First question is, how are you automating the ingestion of those fixed files to ensure that
Yeah, so that was a whole weekend of me pulling my hair out, because what I found real quick, especially with the OpenIOC stuff and Yara stuff, the XML, at first I thought, I'll pull it in on the fly, parse the XML via PowerShell, look at it dynamically. Huge mistake, because a lot of times those indicators are not nested at the same level. PowerShell did not play nice with that. So what I did was, it's not there, but I can certainly kind of share my trials and tribulations, was I ended up bringing that thing into SQL. Once I got it in a table, there was a whole bunch of T-SQL that went into kind of parsing out the actual value. Only just because of my failure as a PowerShell programmer. I'm a little bit better on the SQL side, where I could pull that in, parse out the actual value that I want, and then export it into a CSV. So the end result is that you have a CSV of registry key or registry value and file name and what the description is, and then you just feed it in and search it through it, and then it would spit out a hit of, hey, we found Zeus and this indicator. So yeah, that was something I struggled with, and I didn't find really an elegant solution for it. I'm sure there's probably a better one than that, but Yeah, I mean, like I said, there's a lot of other things that you could do, and that's a great one, to look for. One of the other crazy ideas I had was, let's kind of, look at the headers, from a hex standpoint to see, hey, is this something that's malicious? And that kind of goes into the unknown binaries that you might find or stuff with no extension. But yeah, that's a great suggestion. Questions? Back? Yeah, and I did gloss over that, but there is a section in there where we'll pull the audit policy so you can kind of see that. But that's a great point because you've got multiple levels of auditing that may be happening. So to know that, you might be wasting your time pulling the local, whereas that stuff might be in the domain controller Active Directory or event logs. So yeah, great point. Questions? Somebody else have one? In front? I think they're going to put all the slides up on the BSides site. We'll do a better job than we did last year on that. I think we're still trying to find all the videos and slides to put them on the archive site. But yeah, I'll get with Derek, and I'm pretty sure that he wanted to do that this year and continue to do that with. And that goes for everything, the photos, everything. So yeah, I'll put the slides up there. What's that? Yeah. Well, I still have the mystery USB drive that supposedly has some stuff on there, but I don't know. We'll see if we can pull some off. But yeah, just short answer is yes. We'll try to get that up on the site. Any other questions? Comments? Yeah, that's something I plan to put up on GitHub. Like I said, if you guys want a copy of it now, I'd hope to polish it up a little bit more first. I don't really like the way it's outputting the HTML report. It just looks nasty. So I'm going to clean that up. But by all means, if come up, give me a card or something, I'll send you kind of what we have now. Before then, and again, if someone wants to work on it, got some ideas on what we can add, yeah, I'm open for that too. Other questions? All right, thanks.